Hi guys, Dan here from Kilowatt Auto. So today's video is going to be part 2 based on last week's initial video of testing Autopilot on some back roads. So if you missed last week's video, I'll link that in the description down below. But to bring you up to speed real quick, all I was doing was testing Autopilot and Auto Steer on some winding back roads, and they were on the same stretch of roads that I'd originally run back in February on a more previous version of Tesla software. And really all I was looking at was to see if the Autopilot system has improved over the last several months of incremental software updates. So when looking at last week's video versus Autopilot back in February, it's clear that there's significant improvements that have been made in the system overall. And really what I want to look at in today's video is how my car handled a specific situation with a runner who was on the side of the road. So I think how my car handled this situation really illustrates the current state of where Autopilot is, and also sheds a little bit of light on where Autopilot has to make some improvements in order to get us to full self-driving. So in today's video, I really want to dissect the current state of Autopilot, give you my thoughts on what full self-driving might look like in the future, and illustrate where the gap is between Autopilot as it stands right now and what needs to be done in order to get us to full self-driving. But before we jump into that, if you're new here to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of my weekly videos. My purpose in starting this channel was to share the Tesla ownership experience, but also document the car's progression to full self-driving. So if that's something you might be interested in, definitely consider subscribing, and just be aware that I do post a new video every Saturday. Also, I do post a referral link in each description of my videos, so if you end up deciding down the road that you'd like to purchase a Tesla, if you use that referral link, that'll get you 1,000 free supercharging miles that you can use towards supercharging once you take delivery of your Tesla. The first thing I want to do in today's video is just share the footage from last week of the car handling the situation with the runner on the side of the road, and just take a look at exactly what the car saw and how it responded to that situation. So I just want to call out a couple of things that just occurred when we're looking back at the footage of the car identifying the runner and then sort of how it processed that situation. So well ahead of time, the car recognizes that there's someone on the side of the road, and you can see the person show up on the center display, which gives me the idea that the car was able to recognize that there's a person there. At that point, it starts to apply the brakes, and it doesn't apply max braking. I've actually been in the car before when the emergency braking system was activated when someone stopped short in front of me, and I can tell you that this was definitely not that situation. A little warning actually pops up on that center display telling you when the max braking system is initiated. In last week's video, I thought the car actually moved to the left on its own. That was actually, after looking at the footage, that was myself that did that. So just my gut reaction to the situation, I pulled to the left on the steering wheel a little bit. And anytime you adjust the steering away from the direction that the car is going, that will automatically disengage Autopilot. So that's sort of what happened in that situation. So looking at the implications of this interaction, the car, in my opinion, handled the situation fairly well. So it recognized that there was something in the road, specifically a person. So given the sort of constraints that the car's software is placed upon it, it didn't really have many options in terms of how it was going to handle this situation. So the car is clearly programmed not to cross a double yellow line. So really the only option that it had was to slow down to avoid hitting the runner on the side of the road. So I think the car performed fairly well in this situation. I'm not sure that slowing down to a complete stop was maybe the safest decision, but given the software constraints that the car has and not being able to cross a double yellow line, I think it made the best of the situation at hand. But it does definitely illustrate that there is still a significant gap between how Autopilot is performing and normal human driving. And in my opinion, and I know, this is coming from the perspective of the end user, I'm not a coder by any means, I'm not familiar at all with working with artificial intelligence, but the ultimate goal is to get Autopilot and full self-driving to the point where it's indistinguishable between normal human driving. So there's still clearly a significant gap here. I think the car slowing down wasn't the safest decision that it could have made, especially if someone was tailgating me or even if someone was remotely close following me behind. The car did slow down fairly significantly, so the risk for getting rear-ended definitely increased. But again, I think given the situation at hand, the ultimate goal is not to hit a person, and the car handled that fairly well. So in my opinion, the ultimate goal of full self-driving should be to have the car to sort of pass a variation of the Turing test. And what I mean by that is that the car's driving characteristics should be indistinguishable from that of a typical safe human driver. And at this point, I honestly think we're still at least 5 years away from getting to that point. Where Autopilot is currently, it's impressive. It's incredible to think that just 5 or 6 years ago, none of this technology was even available. And now having this in a fleet of hundreds upon thousands of cars is remarkable. But the cars are still driving under the constraints of programming. And again, I'm not a software engineer. I have no experience coding anything. I know almost nothing about artificial intelligence, so I cannot imagine how complicated these systems are to design and create, especially when you're dealing with human lives. So taking all of that into account, the work that has to be done has got to be, it's monumental to get cars to the point where they're going to drive as humans would, and better than humans would, given all the type of driving scenarios that occur on a typical commute. I think the full self-driving is something that's definitely attainable. It's something that Tesla should strive for. We'll get there eventually, but right now it's important to remember that it's still a learning system. So you have to remain engaged when you're using Autopilot. You need to be ready to take over at a moment's notice, because the car does occasionally make incorrect decisions and unsafe decisions. So you need to be ready to handle that and respond accordingly. Regardless though, I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming down the line with full self-driving, and really that's the most enjoyable part of owning a Tesla, is these incremental improvements and eventually getting to that point where the car is going to be able to drive itself as a human would, and much safer than a human would. So with all of that said, it's important to understand that full self-driving is operating under a set of constraints set by humans that unfortunately sometimes limit its ability to drive like a human. And I think the way it handled the runner on the side of the road is a classic example of that. So a typical human would swerve out of the way and move back into the lane, whereas the car decided that it should just come to a complete stop. So it just further affirms the point that while we're using Autopilot, we need to make sure that we're constantly engaged, we have our hand on that wheel, and we're ready to take over at a moment's notice, because the car is still learning. We have to be ready to help it along in that process, and then we also have to be ready when it does occasionally make an unsafe decision. But with that said, I'm really happy with the current state of Autopilot. I don't regret buying full self-driving, and actually on that note, full self-driving is set to increase in price on July 1st. So if you're viewing this video and it's still June of 2020, the $7,000 price point is going to increase to $8,000 as of July 1st. And I did make a video on full self-driving, what's included with that software. So I'll link that above if you want to check that out, especially if you're on the fence about whether or not you want to upgrade before that price increase. But with that said, that's where I'm going to end today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe for my weekly videos. Over the next couple of weeks, I am going to be taking a long road trip from Western Pennsylvania back to New Jersey. I am going to try to run Autopilot for the majority of that, so I look forward to sharing with you how the car does on that extended road trip. Also, if you're interested in buying a Tesla, make sure you use that referral code down below, and that'll get you 1,000 free supercharging miles. But with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.